sometimes the Buffman thinks he's being smart and he uses black paint.
Problem solved, right? Not even close. The Buffman had no chance. Today we're taking a page right out of the Buffman's playbook and buffing all of the most popular graffiti paints and inks that are in these graffiti tagging tools. Now, you all know the Buffman. Even if you ask ChatGPT what the Buffman is, even it knows. He's a buffoon. But he does love his stupid gray paint and his stupid paint roller. So today we're going to be doing one of his favorite activities and seeing exactly how many layers of gray paint it takes to cover up all of these graffiti paints and inks, and which ones bleed through the most. So graph heads and graffiti haters alike, I think you're going to want to see this.
Perfect.
Now I'm going to show you the creation of every single tag on our surface testing area and tell you exactly what mop or marker it was done with and what formulae are in all of these. Then we'll be buffing all of them to see exactly which ones stand up best to the Buffman, and there will be some surprises because some of these mops and markers are filled with custom paint and ink formulae, so stick around if you want to hear kind of those little secrets as well. Now, we've been preparing this buff test for months as we filled up this testing surface right here with some of graffiti's deadliest paints and inks via our tags. Any of you who aren't new around here are used to seeing these tag testing surfaces clean and pristine when we start our tagging tests, but I'm going to go through every single one of these tags with you guys, tell you and show you what each tag was made with so that we know which ones we might expect to have the most resistance to the buff. Then we'll see what the Buffoon Man has to offer. To start off here, this jumbled mess actually tells us something really important that you need to know to really understand what we can expect from this buff test and to understand why the 50 IQ Buffman just using his bucket paint isn't all that smart. Now to start off, the black tag that's fairly obscured under there, that was the first tag done. We actually did it with this random black ink that we got from Temu of all places. You can see the full surface tagging test in the corner or the description if you want to check that out. Subsequently, the green and purple tag done there were done with the Montana Street Dabber alcohol-based paint. The kind of teal coffin tag there, that was done with a Grog Squeezer Mini. They come filled with extra flow paint, also alcohol based. But as you're seeing here, the black rover tag is bleeding right through these other paints, and that tells us something really important about inks versus paints. Inks interact with the surface they're on. They bleed into a surface and bleed through anything that tries to cover them up. Contrast that to paints. Paints don't really interact with things that cover them up. So what you can expect to see here, and this is my prediction, I think once we put one layer of gray over this, these three paints are going to disappear and you're actually going to be able to see the Rover Wonder tag even more clearly than right now that was done with this black ink. And before I tell you about any of these other tags, we're going to cover this part up with the first layer of paint just to see if that's true or not of this particular ink. Let's wait for this to dry. Well, I hate to say it, but we might have been wrong the whole time because I've let this dry a little bit and I'm not seeing any bleed through. Now, my thought is that probably this ink, all black ink you see on here is that same black ink I showed. All of it has been on here for about 6 months. Maybe it's just too old to be bleeding through. But also, we just did a nice thick layer, as you do, and not really seeing much bleed through at all there. So I'll show you some of the other ones here, and we'll see if they bleed through more effectively, because I think some of these other ink formulae might have something to say. So this one up here in red, that was done with a Sakura pen touch, obviously very thin, normal chisel tip marker. I don't expect to see much from it. But this silver one, that could be a bit of a dark horse. I'd be more optimistic about it if we'd see more bleed through here. But the reason it's a bit of a dark horse is, although it is predominantly done with this, which you can see has a lot of blue in the bottom. If you don't believe me, here's the tag being done. The reason I'm calling it a dark horse is because it's filled with OTR marker paint, very thin paint, and Grog buff-proof ink. So there is a bit of that buff-proof ink in there. I don't know if it'll come through or not. My guess is probably not, because silvers tend to do a really good job of combating inks. But like I said, a bit of a dark horse. Now you can see this kapow tag, that black ink showing through, but not much to say about it. One you might have missed, this Sciz tag over here, that was done with a Molotov scroll stick. Now these scroll sticks are incredibly messy, but what they are filled with is, it's a solid wax marker. So this is a ink infused wax, very, very staining. So you never know what could come from that. Now under those, we have that same green Montana Street Dapper with some more straight up buff proof ink on top. The red ink under there, that is some Dang ink, also an alcohol based ink. These two are much more recent, maybe they'll stand a chance. Any remnants of white you're seeing there, that is block by block ink. They call it an ink, I'm fairly sure it's a paint. I'm not expecting much there, but let's get a first layer covering this stuff up and we'll see if we see anything different. Now, just so you guys know, buff tests like this are part of the exclusive content that the patrons get if they're part of our Patreon crew. We do monthly exclusive videos over there. Some of the time that means buffing specific inks and paints. A lot of the time it's graffiti analyses to help those of you who are trying to get better at graffiti. And some of the names you saw tagged up here are names of patrons in the Patreon crew as well. So if you want extra monthly exclusive content, you can check out the Patreon crew in the corner, or it's always linked in the description. Now, I'm trying to give you guys the best look I can with the camera of the bleed through here. It's not as strong as I would have thought. I guess Buffman paint just too good. I don't know. You are getting some bleed through very noticeably from the Molotov scroll stick there, and you can see very clearly, at least to the eye. I don't know if the camera picks it up all that well. The Sciz tag with the buff proof ink. There is some red bleeding through here from a really old tag that was done with some kind of no-name ink. It's coming through actually better than all of these other ones. Now, because these aren't bleeding through nearly as much as I thought they were going to be, one thing I'm gonna do for you guys is I'm gonna do some tags with all of the inks once we buff this out, and then we'll try and cover those up after letting them dry for an hour or two, because I want you guys to see the power of the bleed through that we're not really seeing here. I never expected this level of power from the Buffman paint. But let's move on. Now, this silver one's a very interesting one. It was done with the PX30 silver paint formula, and there's something you guys have to know about it. You might be saying, why didn't this black ink bleed through like the black ink up there did with the Montana Street Dabbers? And the answer is, there's two reasons. The first is, this is an oil-based paint formula. Paint, not ink, but oil-based paint formulae cut through anything. It's just a property of that base of paint. They tend to do really well cutting through grease, grime, dirty surfaces. Similarly, this one, because it uses silver particulate in particular, those metal pigment particulates do a really good job of not being messed with by any kind of ink. They're very impenetrable. Now, none of that means this is going to withstand a buff. You can expect it to get covered up pretty easily. But a few more tags down here. If you're looking at this nice star, that is done with some on the run flow pen ink. But a really important one, if you were on the channel back in the day, you saw us do a buff test of this. This is the IM14 bleed through. It's an ink. It's meant to bleed through. And when we did our bleed through test of that, it bled through several layers of paint. So this will be a really good test to see maybe the Buffman paint is just on another level. Because if it can cover this up, it's doing something right. Let's see. Well, this is just incredible. I'm seeing no bleed through. And in our test specifically of the IM14 bleed through, you can see it bled through many layers. So we're just getting outclassed by the Buffman paint right now. I'm baffled. Overall, this is not impressive. Graffiti brands are getting kicked in the ass right now by a simple interior paint. I am putting thick layers down, but that's no excuse at all. But let's go through the last of these tags, and then we'll get some of the most prominent inks that are supposed to be good up here to see if the tags do a bit better if they're not a few months old. So these last few tags here were done when the table was flipped upside down. So you know what? I'll flip you guys upside down so you're looking at the tags right way up. Now to start, this one over here, that is just a simple Crankcase 60 paint formula. Don't expect much from it. This nice kind of bluish silvery one here. Now that was done with, again, a custom paint formula. If you want to see how this formula tagged in a shoe polish mop, would really recommend checking the video in the corner out. It turned out really awesome. But mainly what it is again, buff proof ink, but mixed with this time some Grog Extra Flow paint in silver. That's why you have that lustrous tint to it. This one right here, that was done with the Pilot Supercolor Broad marker. And the last two, the Magic tag, suitably done with the Magic Ink Glass body. Now those are an oil-based ink. Oil-based does not necessarily mean better for bleed through. It just is a strong base for an ink or paint. But again, I don't know how that's gonna work out. The last one here, the Quack tag, that was done with none other than Incredible Ink from On the Run. Incredible Ink for me has been one of the hardest bleed through inks I have used. But let's complete this buff so we can really see if these inks stand a chance at all if they're fresh. So I'm gonna level with you guys. That's not how this buff test was supposed to go so far. We were supposed to beat the 50 IQ Buffman who's just using gray bucket paint. And aside from the buff proof ink, which has shown through a little bit, all of these heavy staining inks have failed this buff test with just 1 or 2 layers. So if anyone from any of these companies is watching, what the f are you guys doing right now? All of these inks were fairly easy to cover up, but maybe I'm being unfair. I did super thick layers of paint to cover them up, and some of the tags had been sitting there for months. So it makes sense that their bleed through properties might not be what they were when they were newer. So just to be fair to these products specifically, we're gonna do a few tags with each of these products, and I'll show you what kind of buff tests they're kind of meant to sustain in terms of being covered with a paint. Because right now, if these inks were people, they should be embarrassed. So right now we're just getting some tags up there with each of the 6 inks that we're going to be trying to buff out once again. I'm going to label each of them up there so you can tell which ones exactly we are tagging with, and when it comes time to do that buff, which ones are holding up best against the buff. Shout out to Richie, the newest member of our Patreon crew. Thank you so much for your support. So right now, all of these have had a bit of a chance to dry and set into the surface. So what we're gonna do is just a very simple spray paint buff. First with white, and then I'll show you a little trick with black, just because this will at least outline what these inks are supposed to be able to do. Now that is what this thing is supposed to be able to do. It doesn't even look like we put a layer of paint over this. Let's try the Incredible Ink. Let me show you something that the Buffman tries to do a lot that they think works really well. So you see, sometimes the Buffman thinks he's being smart and he uses black paint. Problem solved, right? Not even close. The Buffman had no chance. So this is all of the tags side by side with one layer of spray paint over them. You can pause the video if you want to take a look and compare them. So I hope if nothing else you're seeing how permanent inks are compared to paints in the graffiti market when it comes to a paint buff. But the Buffman's not always going to be doing a paint buff. A lot of times they'll be using a chemical buff, which is what we test a lot of the time over on our Patreon page. If you want to see me do a chemical buff test of all the graffiti inks, maybe try and get this video up to like 250 likes to let me know that enough people are interested in it. And if you want to see the top 5 unbuffable ways to do graffiti, you can check that video out on screen right now. Thanks to patrons for all your support. I'll see you over there soon. Peace.